I have information on the disappearance of Tim Molnar. Unsolved since 1984. Found in Washington County. Back in 1984, a body was found in Washington County, WI. It was a young boy found with clothes matching a missing case of a boy named Tim Molnar. Tim was a 19-year-old boy from Daytona Beach, Florida. The morning he went missing, he dropped his 14-year-old brother off at school before driving to class. He never arrived at school, and later his car was found at a Greyhound bus station in Atlanta, Georgia. When his parents arrived to the car to inspect it, they found Tim's wallet, ID, and credit cards. What they didn't find, however, was the valuable items believed to have been in the car with Tim. The stereo that Tim had installed in the car himself, his bike, and his expensive tool set. As his ID and wallet were found, it seems that for years the most credible theory was that Tim had run away to start a new life, possibly having adopted a new identity when he left his car. However, Tim had taken no clothes from his home before leaving, and there is no evidence that he packed anything at all. Then the next information we have was his body was found in Wisconsin. Found by Stephen Cull. Later this story was told by Stephen on Unsolved Mysteries in 1995. Now I have information that might be prudent to this story. In the 1980s, my family had a friend named Richard Jashinsky. He was friends with my uncle and spent a lot of time with him and my aunt. My parents would come down to Wisconsin from Minnesota, and Richard would often be there. My parents never liked him and often found him odd. Speaking to my father, he told me that from the minute he met Richard, he knew something was off. Richard would often show up to my family property, only down the street from where Tim was found, uninvited. My dad says now that he thought that Richard was coming to scope out the land for something weird. Our property was remote farmland that had a long driveway leading up to the house. A perfect place for a body to be hidden. Richard Jashinsky, now in his 80s, lived in Wisconsin and flew planes. He had a small plane that he would often fly between Florida and Wisconsin. I have been told that Richard had a young man staying in his small shack of a home who would be coming through town. Now that information isn't confirmed, but it seems to be true. Later in life, Richard was convicted of sexual assault of a child. He moved to Arizona and can still be found on the sexual offenders registry. The thing that I find odd in these two people together is this. Even though Tim Molnar was technically of age, the fact that he was from Florida, where Richard would often be, then found less than a mile away from where he would spend a lot of his time, and for Richard to be arrested in 2001 for sexual assault of a child, seems too odd to be a coincidence. Stephen Cull, the kid who found Tim's body, lived across the street from my aunt and uncle's house. His family has been their neighbors for many years. The fact that Richard would spend a lot of his time showing up to my family's property uninvited, across the street from the man who found Tim's body, also seems too odd to be a coincidence. I will say, back in 2019, my brother and I put all this information on the internet. We posted on Unsolved Mysteries, My Favorite Murder, and other Reddit pages. We contacted Milwaukee Homicide, sent the information to the FBI, but nothing was ever done about it. Now I will include below the information that my brother provided on the internet and gave to law enforcement back in 2019. Throwaway for obvious reasons, I just reported what I know to the FBI. I have family in Wisconsin. When we are driving past a park area, my father remarks how family friends found a skeleton known as the Mancha's skeleton, while looking for shed antlers. Later, while watching Unsolved Mysteries covering the disappearance of Molnar, he, the family friend, makes the connection to the unidentified body he found years before, tells Ellie, and lo and behold, it's Molnar. My father remarks how he always suspected a former friend of his brother-in-law, my uncle, of committing the crime, because he was a creepy guy and was convicted of second-degree sexual assault against a child in 2001 and lived in town. My sister and I are like WTF and ask him if he ever tipped off law enforcement. He's like, well, no, we can't believe it, but the evidence isn't really beyond he's a peso at this point. But we are headed to my uncle's who knew this man. The man he knew was Richard J. Jashinsky. And as we ask more and more questions of our uncle, the more damning the picture becomes. Dick, as he was known, was a strange man who lived nearby in a barn-like shack, where he would often let young male drifters crash, rotating through. From this shack he was also a poacher, killing animals illegally and surviving off them. My uncle remembers how he tried to burn the bones in a furnace to hide his poaching and failed, and began looking for other methods of disposal. He also would leave in the winter to Florida, where he had a plane and would often fly back and forth, but would often drive down and fly out. Tim disappeared in January 1984 from Florida, leaving his car at a Greyhound station, taking a bike with him that was found with his body all the way in Wisconsin. Like I said, he was later convicted of pedophilia in 2001 and had infiltrated a Christian boys and girls club. He would also take long unannounced walks on my family's property, making me wonder what he was really up to. I'm trying to remember more. I have a feeling I've forgotten a super creepy piece of the Florida connection, but wanted to put this out there for my conscience and for Tim. If this guy had something to with it, then I have to say something. But oddly, when I contacted my aunt, she said she wanted nothing to with it at all, my tip to the FBI, and my uncle had been sort of defensive when talking about it. But I think he's dealing with guilt from being friends with Dick and not realizing who he was. And like I said, my father literally had all the info and never reported it. Here's to hoping something comes of this. Now all of this information comes from us trying to put two and two together for the sake of this unsolved case. But we hope that somehow this can get out there and be spread and maybe reopen the case of Tim to put an end to what would have happened to him.